Let's get down to some real differences between me and John Hickenlooper. First, Hickenlooper owns a brewery, and me,
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Conversations Cafe. As you may notice, I am your host, but I am not Carl Evans. I am Amanda Osowski. I'm an infertility and postpartum doula, and I'm the founder of Heartfelt Beginnings. I'm really proud to be here tonight, guest hosting this week, bringing you an episode called All in the Family, Parenting in 2020. 2020 has been a roller coaster of a year for all of us, and one that none of us, I think, could have predicted. We've had stress, surprises, detours, cancellations around every turn, and it's been a really difficult year. I think that has been exponentially so for those of us who are parents, as we've not only navigated initial cancellations and closures of schools and childcare due to COVID-19, to racial injustice, police brutality, the stress and anxiety that comes with any back to school season, but more so this one, as well as maybe welcoming new members to our household. And so parents have really been put up to a challenge this season. The panel of parents we have here for you tonight is composed of Hope for the Day staff, volunteers, and Ages of Impact. And tonight we'll be discussing all of this and much more while sharing personally what 2020 has been like so far for us to parent, and also looking towards 2021 and beyond. I'm really excited to start by introducing our panelists tonight. First, we have Sherry Gross, Manager of Veteran Services at College of DuPage. Sherry got connected with Hope from the Day from the Road Home program. Sherry's a mom to 3 kids, ages 8, 5, and 1, and her husband is a veteran and a police officer. Next, we have Jasmine Shannon, mom of 2 boys, ages 6 and 8, who are also featured in the Stigma Swear video. She's a part-time pharmacy technician, and one of her sons has been diagnosed with ADHD, which adds in an extra element to her parenting experiences. And last but not least, we have Kennedy Ward, who's on the Project Red team. She's a graphic designer for the Marine Corps, and she's a single mom of 2, ages 6 and 3, one of which has special needs. So thank you all for joining us. Welcome tonight. And I'd like to go ahead in that same order and just have you guys unmute yourselves and tell us a little bit more about yourselves. And maybe if you want to choose one word to encapsulate what parenting in 2020 has been like for you. So we're going to go ahead and start with Sherry.
Okay, thank you. Like Amanda said, I have 3 children, an 8-year-old girl, a 5-year-old boy, and a baby boy that just turned 1. If I had to describe parenting in 2020 in one word, it would be exhausting, I guess, is one of the words. I feel like I'm constantly tired. Especially since e-learning started last week for us. My kids are in the Chicago public school system. I just feel mentally drained and exhausted. Some days physically exhausted, but more it's just like my brain doesn't work after a certain time of day.
Man,
so, yeah, I've primarily been working with veterans and their family members for about 12 years. Like Amanda mentioned, my husband's a veteran and a police officer, and I currently work in higher education, but I worked in mental health well with veterans. So I don't know if there's anything else you want me to elaborate on. I'm sure we'll get to talking. So
yeah, that was perfect. And I can't wait to hear some more about your story. Thank you so much for sharing. Jasmine, if you don't mind.
Hi. So I have 2 boys, 6 and 8. My oldest, Yeah, he was diagnosed with ADHD. He was also diagnosed 2 years ago with PANDAS, which is a pediatric autoimmune neuropsychotic, I believe, disease associated with strep. So that was a whole nother kind of issue added in, but we've been working on that. I think the word I would use to describe parenting this year, just crazy, maybe. It's just wild. You never know what's coming. You don't know what's next. I'm a part-time pharmacy technician. I actually just started the job not even a year ago due to staying at home with the kids most of the time while my husband Ryan worked. He's also part of Project Red Team. That's like his extra baby. So just starting the job and then having all of this happen has been kind of wild, and
Absolutely.
excited for the new year to come, see what's going on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And last but certainly not least, when Kennedy looks like she's got a little lovey with her.
Yes. Yeah, so like she said, my name is Kennedy Ward. I'm a single mom of 2 boys. My oldest Case is 6. He's in the 1st grade, e-learning. He is on the autism spectrum and lives with sensory processing disorder. And then my youngest son, Camber, is 3. He was actually on a feeding tube for the first year and a half of his life. I had my oldest when I was 18. My ex-husband and I got married when I was 18. And so we were together for about 5.5 years, married for 4, a number that's in between 1 and 10. And so when we decided to split, I kind of had my mom was a single mom growing up. So I kind of knew that there were going to be triumphs and struggles. But I graduated college in August. And so I went into coming into the job force and then parenting from home and teaching 1st grade and trying to work all from home. And if I could use one word, it would be, I don't know, it's kind of weird. I think I would use hopeful because I feel like in this time as hard, and they're on level 10 tonight. So they'll probably in and out and you'll hear them for sure. But I'm hoping that out of how hard this has been, that once things kind of do start going back into a routine, it'll allow me to feel a little bit better and hopefully use the tactics that I've gained in this to move forward. If I had to use a time right now, or word right now, it would be just give me all the melatonin. I just want to sleep forever, just for a really long time. Wake me up in a year and we'll be good.
Absolutely. Well, I think certainly anybody who's watching this tonight who has kids or has been around kids, your kids in and out is not a problem. We recognize that as parenthood at its most honest. So please don't stress about that at all. Thank you guys all so much for sharing. And so I have a variety of questions that I'm going to kind of ask, but I want this to be a really comfortable conversation. And so feel free to jump in at whatever point you want. If you feel quite passionate about some questions or less passionate about others, there's no sort of right or wrong, no structure, and I'm not going to call on people. So just go ahead and contribute where it feels good. I want to start with talking about what things that 2020 has changed with your relationship with your partner. And so Kennedy, obviously this would be your communication with your ex, but within your relationship, your communication, and your parenting, how has 2020 changed that in ways that other years have not affected?
I'll start. So with my husband, once this started, he has been working from home from about March or April, so a lot more time together, plus having the kids home all the time.
Yeah.
I want to say at first it was a struggle. We kind of we have very different parenting strategies because I'm such a pushover, and so he always has to be the law layer there. But I must say as time's gone on, it's gotten a lot better. Our communication's gotten better. Everything over time, I believe, has gotten stronger between us. So at first I was like, oh gosh, this is going to be wild. But now I feel confident about it. It's good. I mean, he is going back to work in the office in October, so I'm okay at that. But he was traveling a lot before too, so this has cut down traveling. So it's been nice having him home all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like for all of us, the transitions have been really different, and the types and significance of the decisions that we're making as parents seem really different in this season to me than I think that they were before.
Yes.
I was going to say, I feel like we had this pandemic start, right? And I'm home, and I'm usually not home. I work in an office, but my office is my back porch now. And my husband usually worked like 3 to 11. So I would work and I'd come home and he wouldn't be there. So I was used to doing everything myself. So not only did this pandemic make me be home all the time, but his shift changed to 8 to 4. So I thought I would love it and be like, oh my gosh, I have all this help in the evening. And for the most part, I do. Like, it's great having him there, especially having 3 kids now. But sometimes I'm just like, oh my gosh, you never leave. Like, I love you, but can you please like go? And I really hope he's not watching this right now. I hope he's busy with the kids when bedtime and dinner and all that, because he'd be like, great, thanks. You hate me on, live podcast. But I feel like it's more together time than we've ever been used to, even though he still is going to work every day. Obviously, he has to go. So that took a lot of getting used to, but I feel like we still argue about the same stuff. Like, that whole dynamic, like kids, money, division of labor, like that just is always going to be a thing. But I think that I've gotten better at not beating around the bush and suffering in silence. I'm just like, okay, this is what's wrong. Because it's even worse when we're together all the time and I'm mad. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And I think that my guess is that a lot of other people are relating and nodding their heads to everything that you guys have both said. Like I said, the nature of and the types of decisions that we're making all day, every day, and the mental fatigue of living in a pandemic, I think just amplifies emotions. It amplifies challenges in communication. So I appreciate your sharing, because I'm going to guess that a lot of people are sitting there nodding their heads as well. On that, go ahead, Kennedy. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think in my particular situation, everything kind of completely changed in 2020. When I was in college, I was commuting back and forth. So on my weeks with my kids, I was living in Virginia, and the weeks they were with their dad, I was living in South Carolina. And so in my senior semester, I got cut short. So we were all living in Virginia. And my ex-husband and his girlfriend had a baby in July. And so I think, if anything, the pandemic has really forced us both to like not suppress things that we want to say. It's kind of forced us to be like, these are our circumstances right now. And if that means that we have to deal with the kind of the ripple effect of things that we've set in place in the past, then that's kind of what we have to deal with. It's definitely been really trying. Today was one of those days with my oldest being in special education. He was in daycare, and we had to pull him because they were not getting his work done. And so that changed the dynamic of our pickup drop off. That changed the dynamic of how we're communicating and what we need to communicate about. And it's like brought me back. So my initial like introduction to mental health came from postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. And so it brought me back to like all of those emotions of when I first started to feel them, and really was self-aware of like struggles with mental illness. Yeah. And how much has changed, but also at the same time, like how much work is still to be done. And it's definitely an ongoing process. But it's definitely a balance of like something that's rewarding and then something that's also super trying at the same time, especially because, he lives in a 2-person household and I live in a 1-person household. And so because we do things so differently, it's a lot of having to put the shoe on the other foot.
Absolutely. And that feels exhausting just to think about it from an outsider's perspective. So absolutely. On that same note, will you talk a little bit about how this season has changed your relationship with your boys?
Yeah. I think that I feel like everything's 50-50 for me. I mean, it was really cool when I got the call to do this. Today has like been one of those days where I was literally crying before I got on here, and it'll probably happen again. But it's one of those things where like some days you're so frustrated with the circumstances and they're so frustrated because they don't understand the circumstances. So like, I can't just put them in the car and go to the park, or I can't put them in the car and walk around Target. I have to put them in the car and then explain to my 6-year-old why he has to put a mask on, and then complain about the fact that it makes his face tingly because of his sensory processing. And then my 3-year-old doesn't understand why he can't buy a toy because for the last 6 months, all there has been to do is buy a toy. And so I think in some ways it's forced us to like get to know each other a little bit better. So they can sometimes sense like when I'm overwhelmed, they'll come over and be like, Mom, are you okay? Like everything's okay. And they'll like sing me the Daniel Tiger song and then I cry and it's like a whole thing. But then there's also times when like I can tell that they're overwhelmed, or like when my oldest is doing his schoolwork, like I can tell the difference in him getting frustrated and him just being lazy. And so it's forced us to develop our bond, but at the same time, it's definitely been trying to going from, you know, we're all in sync now. Between the three of us, we were all doing our own little thing, cohabitating. And I think it's kind of forced us to be like one, which is something that has always been really hard for me since my postpartum depression. And so I think it's definitely strengthened it in the way that we communicate and understand each other. But I definitely find that I cry or break down a lot easier than I did previously, just because most of my coping skills had a lot to do with, like we were talking before we jumped on, like talking to people, going out and doing things. And as an extrovert being forced to be in the house, my coping skills have had to take like a complete 180 and I've had to find new things. So I think it's strengthened us in some ways, but I think in other ways it's definitely pushed us to our limits of being able to handle each other.
Absolutely. And I think so many people are going to be able to relate to everything that you just shared. I think that this is such a season of heavy and light. I feel like I overuse that expression a lot, but I feel like life is heavy and light. And I feel like my response to 2020 has been heavy and light. And yeah, I've been in the same place where I just want to take my kid to walk around Target and I don't want to hear Frozen a single more time ever again. But you know, I also find myself being pushed to tears way more often and feeling like my frustrations in parenting are being compounded by the fact that we can't leave the house and no one else can play with my kid and she's not getting any other interaction besides us. And so absolutely. I completely agree with all of that. Sherry and Jasmine, do you guys have any other things to add in terms of how this year has changed your relationship with your kids?
Well, I was going to say, I really liked how you paralleled, Kennedy, how you're feeling sometimes now and how you felt when you were, you know, in the throes of postpartum. I struggled with it really badly after my middle son. And the feelings of like never being enough and not having enough time and not having enough love and not having enough, you know, knowledge, just not being enough for anyone.
Yeah.
I think has been magnified in these last 6-7 months because I feel like I'm being torn in half a lot of the time. My kids need something, my husband needs something, my job needs something. And I am very, very lucky that my in-laws and my parents are very, very involved in our lives. My mom and my mother-in-law are basically like my best friends, especially now during this time. I'm actually at my in-laws' house right now because they're not here. And so I can't imagine how people that don't have the kind of support we have are feeling if I'm feeling this torn in half. I actually explained it to a friend the other day. Like I feel like a crumpled up piece of tissue paper after an art project where like there's rips in it and it's see-through and you can't really smooth it out. It's still all wrinkly even when you try to make it pretty. I was really depressed last week. Like first week of e-learning had me low.
You're not, I know, I tell you that I know you're not alone in that, but
Yeah.
not at all. Not by a long shot.
But with my kids though, I've been really forced to slow down. I've worked full time since my oldest was 8 weeks old. So I've never really been off. And I got to spend my littlest almost his whole first year between my maternity leave and COVID with him. And therefore with my other two, like way more time than I've ever spent with my kids as a parent. So we did get to know each other better. And I feel like I'm a little bit more intuitive, like Kennedy was saying, like in realizing when they're upset or overwhelmed. And it's a blessing and a curse because sometimes I'm like, oh, can you just not right now? But then other times I'm like, well, if I'm this frustrated and sad and lonely, like imagine how they must be feeling because they don't even get it.
Right.
So I think it's been kind of good for all of us, especially me and my older daughter. We're very similar, so we butt heads a lot. And I feel closer to her, and I also depend on her a lot. I feel like this has forced her to grow up sooner because she is like my little mini mom for my other two. And sometimes I'm like, yes, this is awesome. She's so mature and wise. And other times I'm like, have I totally ruined you? Like, what is happening? So yeah, it's just, it depends on the day, I guess. So
I think that is like so accurate for 2020. Like my mood, my tolerance, my ability to handle things, my ability to process and respond to things, my ability to feel like a decent parent and a decent spouse and a decent employee every day, day to day. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kind of piggybacking off what Sherry said, like how we don't know how the kids are processing it when we're having a hard time. It's actually made me think about mental health in our children as well. Our 8-year-old, he's the one who has ADHD. He also was recently put on Prozac. And you would never think that, going along with stigma as well. Like, what do you mean my 8-year-old needs to be put on Prozac? Because during this time, it has brought out depression with him kind of not understanding it all and trying to figure out why he can't go to school or why he can't go to his friends. But also, it has helped him a lot because he is very introverted. So it's helped him kind of just have his time to do stuff and be on his own. But my 6-year-old, when this first started and he couldn't go to school, he cried for days and he just didn't understand. He was like, why can't I go to school anymore?
Yeah.
So I think it's brought like you all said, it's hard. And there are days when when I have work, I'm like, okay, yes, I get to leave the house and go to work now. It's my like break away. But it also has really made me think about what they're going through and how they're trying to process everything, as to where before I'd just be like, you're fine. And now I'm like, oh, this is really affecting our children just as much as it's affecting us, if not more, because we're adults and we know how to process it all for the most part.
Absolutely. And you kind of jumped into another question I had a little bit down the ways, but I wanted to talk about how you guys are protecting your own mental health during this time and how you guys are supporting or thinking about your children's mental health during this time. So Jasmine, you totally started the ball already. And I don't know if you have anything to add about your younger son or about your own mental health, but I just want to kind of open that conversation. I think it's there's a lot of pieces of it. And so whatever you guys feel comfortable sharing, please feel free.
Yeah, I just think it's important for us to check in and understand that even though our children could be younger, they still have these feelings and they still have these emotions. And yes, an 8-year-old can be depressed and can have anxiety, even though we would never think that. We'd be like, oh, you're a kid, you don't have that, but they do.
Right.
So I think just kind of being in tune with our children during that, and then also taking care of ourselves. My mom passed away 2 years ago this October. So a year ago, I finally went to a doctor. I went to a therapist, started doing that. And that has also helped during this time of COVID, because I did get put on also a medication. And I know a lot of medication is not for everybody. I'm on a very low dose, and it's helped me just kind of be able to process everything, especially during all of this as well. And we don't really have family that's close. So it's us and the boys all the time.
In your little silo. Absolutely.
I was going to say, it's a really timely question, because I've been in and out of therapy for the last probably since my middle was born, so about 4 or 5 years. And I'm actually starting with a new therapist next week, because I was finally like, I can't keep doing this like alone. And I know I'm not alone, but there's a difference between like talking to my husband or my parents and talking to a therapist. My oldest has actually had anxiety issues since before she was in kindergarten. So we took her to a therapist for a little bit the summer before she was in kindergarten, and it really helped.
That's awesome.
But with COVID and her being such a social person and loving school, she's having a really hard time, especially with sleep, to where she was waking up more than the baby was for a little while. We're doing like essential oils and a really strict bedtime routine, which I've never really done. Like we do the same thing every night, and we've gotten into a routine where it's kind of working. And one of the ways that I've been able to like help her talk about her feelings, even if she can't name them, we were doing like, what was your favorite part of the day and what was your least favorite part of the day? But God bless her teacher. They started talking about buckets and like what fills your bucket and what empties your bucket. And it's been so good this last week and a half, because she's like, well, can we, instead of talking about our favorite part of the day, can we talk about what fills our buckets every day? And I was like, oh my God, yes, we can. So now before bed every night, it's just me and her. The boys are already in bed, and we get to have like our girl talk. What filled your bucket? What took drops out of your bucket today? And she just loves it, and it helps her open up more, because she also has anxiety, and she's just like me, where she wants everything to be perfect and she doesn't want to disappoint anybody. So I feel like talking about it in terms of like, well, what disappointed you today, but not saying disappointed, it's really resonated with her. And with my middle, just starting kindergarten online is not the best. Like, he loved school and now he's like, I hate it. But I'm really hopeful that he'll have a better experience as time goes on, and hopefully maybe we can go hybrid. But yeah, I think just for me, their mental health, and I said this to my husband today, when will there come a point where people's mental health is just as important as their physical health during this COVID period? And I'm not saying like, let's reopen everything and throw away our masks. Like, I'm not that person, but when are we going to start paying attention to what this is doing to our families and to our kids, outside of, do we have the virus or do we not have the virus kind of thing? So it's so layered and hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a lot of things that really resonated with me. I'm also someone who's in regular therapy and on an antidepressant, and using all the skills in my box. And when COVID first started, the first maybe 2 months, I had a really difficult time, and I raised my medicine for a little while, and I, utilized my coping skills, and just the whole adjustment, the whole sort of the fear and the uncertainty. I'm very type A and I'm a control freak, and none of that matters with COVID-19. I recently have been sort of working through the perspective of like the balance between like being cautious and letting go a little bit, and figuring out how, for my household, we can do a few things safely that don't amplify our risk of getting sick, but do fill up our bucket and help our mental health. Because I was finding, as a mom and an entrepreneur and a wife, and someone who is now again going through IVF, that nothing was filling up my cup. That I was just, every single day I was waking up and I was pouring, and I'd go to bed and there was no refill ever. And that was sort of a breaking point for me when I realized that I had to do something to fill up my own cup. And so I could not agree with you more, Sherry. I think that this is such a balance, and like I said from the beginning, I think that as mothers, our decision-making processes have gotten a lot more intense this season, because it's not just, are you going to go and how long are you going to stay? It's 5,000 other details along the way. And so I mean, my heart goes out to every parent or every caretaker in this season, because it's really friggin' hard. And you guys both touched on school, and that was another thing that I wanted to talk about, was how did you guys handle sort of the tumultuous and rapid ending of school in the spring, and then this reintroduction to school this fall? And Sherry, for your little ones who aren't in school yet, like what has childcare looked like?
Well, my oldest was in second grade in the spring, and like everybody else, her school was completely like, how are we going to do this? So it was very minimal interaction with her teacher in her class once a week for an hour on Zoom with a small portion of her class, because CPS has like 30 kids to a class.
Yeah.
And then they would email us PDF packets of worksheets, like their photocopied workbook. And at first she was okay with it, because she was like, this is cool. This is like when they went on strike, because, CPS strike or went on strike in October, and kid loved being off school. It was like the forever snow day, but no snow. And, but by the end of it, that's when she started breaking down, and I had to email her teacher, who we were so lucky that the teachers at our school are so amazing. I was like, listen, we're not going to do any more work for these last 2 weeks. She's been an excellent student, and I know that you know that, but I'm not doing this to her anymore. Like, she's seriously having a hard time. She's not sleeping. She is being aggressive with us. Like, we're not doing this. And her teacher worked with us and was very much like, okay, can we do this, this, and this instead of doing that? And she did, and it was fine. So I was really nervous about this year, but she has interaction with her teacher in her class for 3.5 hours every day. Great. So that adds a whole nother layer of issues, like tech problems and, headaches and all that kind of stuff. The baby trying to break into the room she's in, like literally banging on the door, obnoxious baby toddler. But for these first 2 weeks, at least, I'm really, really, really pleasantly surprised and in awe of the teachers and the administration at our school. They've been wonderful. The principal's wonderful. The teachers are great. The tech issues have been there, obviously, but they're minimal. But I just feel really bad for kids like my son, who their first introduction to real school, to kindergarten, is online, and it doesn't have the same effect. There's kids crying on the screen. Every 5 seconds, it's like, teacher, are we done yet? And these tiny little cute voices, you know, so innocent, just being like, I don't want to do this anymore. When I know that if they were in school, they'd be engaged, you know, carpet time and recess, and, you know, so much of kindergarten is social.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm talking too much now. So somebody else talk. I could talk about school all day.
I was just gonna say, I feel like it's super similar kind of for us, because my oldest was in kindergarten when everything cut out in the spring, but I was also in college, so it ended abruptly for both of us. And at the time, the county that he's in really didn't know what they were gonna do, and he was primarily special education at the time. And so when it ended for him, there was nothing for him to do. So for the end of his kindergarten year, where a primary of his stuff would have been learned, there just wasn't anything there. So we ended up investing in ABC Mouse, which made a significant difference. But it also has been an adaptation for my youngest, because he always knew, okay, Case goes to school, Camber gets to stay home and do whatever. Because at the time, the days that I had them, I made it so that my school schedule and my work schedule, I didn't work on my days with them. And so it was this big change for him, because suddenly I tutored student athletes at Clemson. So suddenly I'm tutoring people all day, and I'm in classes all day, and Case is at home, and he's just like, wait, where are all these people and why are they here? And a dynamic of our relationship changed a little bit. And now that school started for him the first Tuesday after Labor Day. And originally they were in daycare full time, and he was going into the daycare and kind of sitting in this large room full of kids and trying to do his schoolwork. The problem is that a first grader doesn't know how to navigate a computer by themselves, especially a child with autism, who his cognitive understanding, one day it's on, one day it's off, one day it's on, one day it's off. And so sitting down with him the last couple of days, the first day he was in it, he was on it. We have a schedule on the wall. Like, we have laminated pieces of paper so he can check ARC with like expo markers, like anything we can to get him engaged. But it gets to a point where, like, you know, these teachers, the kids can't talk to each other on Zoom or on Google Meets because she has to teach. And so he's like, wait, but my friends are in front of me. Like, why don't I get to talk to them? And then trying to explain it to him of, okay, you know, this is what's going on. And his county is, so first their server crashed the first 2 days of school. So that was a dynamic. But it's also been frustrating, because I don't know if you can hear him in the background, but by the time the day is over, he has so much bent up energy. He does not know how to exert it. And so the physical violence between the two of them has met its max. I mean, literally, as we were coming out of the posters, one had headbutted the other. And so they were like losing it right next to me. And so it's trying to relearn how to regulate emotions and understanding how to, you know, yes, you guys have to spend more time together, but that means that, you know, they were used to only being together for 2 hours in the afternoon, but now they're together, you know, 5-6 hours out of the day. And so they're trying to figure out how to deal with one another. And, you know, you're in my space. Well, what about my time with mom? And what about my time with mom? And it goes back to like your question about kind of like what you're doing for self-care. I feel like in my particular circumstance, and I don't know if this like resonates with other people who are watching, but like, I was in therapy, I was on medication, I was doing everything. And it got to a point where I was like, I feel like I'm supposed to go backwards. Like, I feel like I'm supposed to work with my doctors to go backwards. And that's what I did. I ended up coming off of my medication, and I ended up transitioning out of therapy and doing more like internal work, like working with myself to figure out kind of what my triggers were, and like talking myself, kind of like looking at my emotions and letting them occur and talking myself through them, kind of like living in the moment. And it's been super surreal, because I think if our circumstances weren't the way that they were, I probably would have never forced myself to do it. And It's crazy, because the emotions are much more intense, but the outcome on the other side has been a little bit different. I literally would not have like literally wouldn't be here right now if I never did therapy and medication. They saved my life, and I will recommend them until the day that I die. But it's also been super weird, because at the same time, I feel like what everyone else's norm or like what my normal was has changed so significantly because of the circumstances. Like I traveled to California last week because, and my mom's a nurse, and I like what you said about finding the balance between being cautious and like being overprotective, because I was like, listen, this is what I want to do. She's like, listen, wear your masks, socially distance, wash your hands, don't go out and exceed large groups of people. And I did that, and the difference that it made was like, oh my, like just seeing and working in the veteran space in Cherry, I'm sure you get this, working in the veteran space, people come from so many different places that when college was over, or I interned at Student Veterans of America National Headquarters. And so when that was over, all of my friends are all over the United States. Like they're not, kind of like Jasmine said, it's just me where I am. Like I have 2 or 3 friends that I can kind of hang out with. And so trying to tune back into like my coping skills, they've had to change incredibly. Yeah. And so it's hard to, you know, to travel for those 4 days that I was gone and be like, this is hard because I know what this is supposed to feel like, and it doesn't feel like this right now. But then also remembering that like understanding adjustments and okay, give me 1 second. All the Avengers. Okay. So it's just, it's definitely been a dynamic change of like what my coping skills are and what they were, and how that affects the way that I'm able to like work with them, because I don't think I would have the patience to teach first grade with him if I was still kind of living in that same cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so many people are going to resonate with what you shared. I think that there's so many pieces of this, and as I'm listening to all of your stories, the thing that comes to my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as mothers, do you feel like the advocacy that you've needed to do for your children has amplified significantly in this season?
Yep.
Oh, well, yeah.
I hear that. Like, that's something that I am in awe of all 3 of you in the way that you've shared your story, because I see that. And so I think that parents are superheroes anyways, but in this season more than ever before, you guys are some kick-ass people who are doing some really great things for your kids. And so that's completely recognizable just in the way that you talk about everything that's happening. And so if you haven't acknowledged that about your own journey, please know that I acknowledge it, and that you're really kicking some behind, even though it maybe doesn't feel like that a lot of days. Let's talk a little bit about professionally. So we've talked about parenting, and we talked about kind of what you guys each do, and how the season has changed that. But in what ways have you professionally been impacted by COVID? Are you able to still work now, and have you transitioned fully to being remote? Are you going into an office regularly, and what is that like with your family?
So I'm a pharmacy technician, so I go in to work. I was always part-time just because my husband's job is our number one. I just kind of started working to get out of the house and have me time.
Yeah.
So I am still going in. It's kind of changed because now I can't work during the day. Prior to this, my hours were during the daytime up until 3, and now I can't work during the day.
Right.
But I also can't really work in the evening if my husband is still at work or has other things. So it's really kind of, at first it opened up my hours with having my husband home when the kids were doing the kind of remote learning in the beginning when it wasn't really scheduled. But now I have to be there with them from 8:30 to 2:30 when they're on. So
like a job in and of itself.
Yes. So, I mean, I still get to go in and all that, but it has changed my hours, changed my availability. Like pretty much all of October, I told them, I was like, I have no availability because his job's first. And then I have the kids who I have to be home with during the day. So.
And has your employer been flexible and understanding about that?
Yes. Okay. Thankfully, they've been great. And from the time I started, like he knew. I've always told them my husband's job is first, and then that I do have 2 kids. So I explained that all up front during my interview and everything. So the whole time I'm working, especially during this, they've been great with kind of scheduling me around and working with me. So I'm super thankful for that.
That's great. That's so good to hear. Kennedy, what about you?
Yeah, so when I finished school, I was supposed to leave Clemson in May and then live in Richmond and commute to DC to intern for Student Veterans of America. And I was supposed to travel with them and do a whole lot of big stuff, and that got shut down with COVID. So this internship that I was hoping to kind of like do really big, cool stuff with ended up turning into a lot of like admin work. And so in a way, it obviously wasn't on Student Veterans of America, but it impacted my mental health a lot because I had just finished busting my ass at school for the last 2 years. And to come into this complete like professional abyss was really frustrating. And so I did my internship with them and then started working at the end of June. We've been remote since. But if anyone listening is ever engaged with the military, specifically the Marine Corps, they love inconsistency. And so one of the things has been, so like, for instance, I didn't get my equipment until a week ago to do my job. I've been on the job for 3 months. I didn't get my equipment until a week ago. The dynamic with it being in Quantico, which is the headquarters of the Marine Corps, is one week it's, hey, we're going to do this. And then another week it's, hey, we're going to do this. And so for now we're remotely, that could change tomorrow. That could change next week. But it makes it hard with kids, only because with co-parenting, we try to have as much of a third party as possible. And with the school, yes, it's for his schoolwork. Can you please leave it alone? Thank you. And so, we've got 2 kids on 2 completely different schedules. And so I'm very thankful that my job has allowed me the flexibility. So like when we do go back in office, the weeks that they're with me, I'll be able to stay home because my oldest, his school day is from like 8 to 1, but my youngest is, or from 8 to 1, my youngest is from 9:30 to 1, and one is in the house, one's not in the house. And so it's definitely been challenging, but it's nice that, especially as someone who does graphic design, so a majority of my time is spent behind a computer, it's nice to see that employers are opening up to telework. It's nice that they're understanding the dynamic of families and how things need to change. Because I definitely had professors in college that were like, single mom that commutes 6.5 hours, you can still get the work done. But now it's nice that our employers are like, you know what, I do understand that your circumstances are a little bit more extenuating. And so let's see what we can kind of work to finesse or to work with you from there. So it's definitely been really nice, especially to see the military space open their minds up a little bit. And to be a part of that as it progressively changes.
Absolutely. And Sherry, tell me a little bit about your story with that.
Well, when everything started, I was still with Road Home.
Okay.
I was with Road Home for 4 years before I came to COD. And a lot of my job was outreach and community engagement and events. Well, that was all my job, not a lot, it was all of it. So I was used to working from anywhere. I could work in a car, I could work at a coffee shop, I could work in an office. So working from home.
Second, I really freaking miss working from the coffee shop. Can we just, I just need to,
right?
I just
like,
need to say that.
No, I agree. I agree. There's something about it. But so that it wasn't so strange to me to not go into my office. It was really strange having my kids around all the time because my kids were either in school or they were at my parents' or my in-laws before or after school days off so that I could still work. I always say that it wouldn't be worth it to us financially for me to work if we didn't have family childcare, because childcare is expensive. Really expensive. So it was okay to work from home, but then outreach, community engagement, and events didn't happen anymore with COVID. Like everything was shut down. So we turned all of our energy to social media, and Road Home quickly transitioned to teletherapy and video visits. They're still doing that. Plug for Road Home. They're going to keep their video visits and their telehealth, even though they're reopened in person. And it's fabulous there. So everybody who needs therapy that's military connected, please go there. And it's no cost. So anyway, yes, now that I've plugged my former job. And then in July, I started at College of DuPage. I actually applied for the job in February on a whim. I worked in higher ed before, and knowing that would be completely in person, but now campus is closed. There's barely any, I almost said kids, there's barely any students on campus. And for employees to go in, if we're not essential, if we're not public safety or anything like that, we have to get special permission to even go into our offices.
Yeah.
So it's my first time being in charge of a team. So I have 5 people that report to me, and I've only met 3 of them in person. And that's only because we met for lunch outside on nice days. I've never met the dean that I report to. He's awesome though, via text and Zoom. And I've only been in my office once for like 3 hours. So my first time with my own office, and I'm working from my back porch. So it's been really strange. I think I mentioned this before we started, but like I was on a Zoom today with other supervisors and literally told them I had no work friends and asked them to be my friends. So that's where I'm at right now, asking people on Zoom to be my friend.
I think a lot of people.
But I mean, I'm a super social person at work where I like to be able to have people to go to when I'm excited about something or when I'm upset about something. And I'm pretty sure that my husband and my parents are sick of hearing about people they don't know at work. So yeah, but I mean, I am really lucky because I'm not commuting. I would have an hour commute each way. I'd probably never see my youngest. He goes to bed at like 6 or 6:30, thank God. But if I was working in the office, I wouldn't see him. So it's a blessing and a curse. Today, I didn't have childcare, so I had my older 2 e-learning while I was trying to do meetings. It's just crazy. It's like I have to wear 6 hats at one time, and some days I'm like, yes, this is awesome, I did it. And other days I'm like, oh my God, somebody like take me away. So again, it depends on the day.
The balance, I like that you mentioned like commute, because same with me. If I was commuting, it'd be an hour and a half each way. And so I would literally only see them for dinner, bedtime, and to get them up and drop them off at daycare.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard, especially like if you live with a mental illness, to conceptualize or give yourself grace, because some days you grieve that the schools aren't in because you want that balance and you want the socialization and you're isolated and you're like, please just get me out of the house. But then there are other days that you're so exhausted from the day before from that isolation that you're like, I'm so glad I don't have to get up and drive an hour and a half and get everybody ready at 5:30 in the morning. And so like, I think if COVID has taught me anything, it's that balance is essential. Like it's going to be balance, and no matter what you're doing, there's going to be some sort of balance. But it's really like taking the grace of each situation and not necessarily comparing them, but allowing them to kind of sit next to each other and converse. Because like I changing jobs in the middle, everybody I knew was in South Carolina. And so now that I'm in Virginia, it's like, and I work on a team of 3 people. And so it's one of those things where like, I'm like, hey, like want to be my friends, or like, hey, like, let's do something, but like not do something because we can't actually go anywhere. And that's the other thing about being a single mom is it's hard, especially because I'm only 24. So finding other single moms who are in a younger age group, it's hard because a lot of my friends, they're living like we're in high school again, drinking Four Locos in each other's basements. And I'm like, I don't really want to do that. I want to play Monopoly and card games and like do super fun stuff and like have my kids play with other kids. But then it's like, also you go to like, moms who are like in the traditional societal age of like in their 30s. I'm like, I want to hang out with you. And they're like, but you're 24. And I'm like, cool. So awesome. We're just going to go right back here. So it's that balance of like, I want a little bit of both, but I have to be okay with not choosing one over the other, but having like them together.
I feel like, along with balance, having like, and this sounds really bad, but like bottom of the barrel expectations for myself some days where like I got up and I functioned minimally has to be okay. Because again, it's with the like never being enough for anybody. If I'm a shitty employee and I'm a good mom, what does that mean? I'm a shitty mom and I'm a great employee, what does that mean? And am I ever a good wife? I don't know. Like it's
and then do you wonder like when is the time for me? Like when do I just be Sherry? Like because I think about that fairly often, like even if
I'm Sherry after 8 p.m. when I can watch Netflix and eat ice cream from the carton in a recliner.
So tired by then.
Yeah, but I've never been a night owl, and I found myself being a night owl. Like I'm that meme that's like I don't want to go to sleep even though I'm exhausted because this is the only time I have.
Yeah.
But then sometimes I go to bed at like 8:30 because it catches up with me. It's just my brain is just mush half the time, so I don't even know what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, it's the same that I'm trying to struggle to like, so like there's some days, so like for instance, I was supposed to go to the gym this evening. I was starting a new gym, but between the 2 of them, and it's been pouring outside since 6 a.m. this morning, I've got nothing done. And so like, it's like, I'm really upset that sorry, something was just thrown at me. I didn't get to go to the gym today. And it's like, I feel selfish because like that's really what I wanted to do, but at the same time I know that that's like the care I needed. Like I needed to have that balance. And then like I couldn't imagine being in a relationship because I'm like thinking about like my postpartum. My ex-husband was not even on my radar. I was like, who are you? You just exist here and help me make this. Like this is the purpose that you serve. And so especially, please stop throwing it in this direction before I get decapitated. It's one of those things where like even like thinking about going and dating as a single mom with like these guys, like I'm like looking at them in this manner and I'm like, there's no way someone else would be able to do this. So having a significant other, I would just be like, okay, you're there, cool, love you, see you on the flip side.
Absolutely. One thing I wanted to ask, and only if you want to speak to it, but both to Kennedy and Sherry, you guys both talked about your journeys with postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum psychosis. Has the pandemic in some ways felt a little bit like those early days for you guys as new moms and sort of navigating the mental health challenges and the physical stress and the anxiety of being new parents and trying to recover from childbirth and all of that?
In some ways, yes. I was lucky enough to recognize that therapy wasn't enough, and I started medication in spring of 2018, and I stayed on it through my third pregnancy and upped my dose when COVID started because I was like, what? I can't function.
Yeah.
And it has definitely helped. My anxiety comes out as like rage and anger, and I become like this person that I don't even like. This like yelly, screamy, awful person. And I've noticed that with having very low expectations some days, like I said, the increase in my medication and really just trying to stop and not control everything, because I too am a type A control freak, that it's been really good. Like today, my kids were driving me nuts with the e-learning. So when both of them happened to have a break at the same time, we danced to a really inappropriate song in the kitchen from Spotify, and their joy was like palpable. And I was like, this is all they want. Like everybody is on edge right now. No one wants to be in Zoom anymore, and all three of us are on Zoom. So let's just put everything on mute and dance to a song about doing shots of alcohol in my in-laws' kitchen, and that's what we did. And it totally changed the course of our day. Did they still fight all day long? Sure did. But it definitely, those little moments where you can like see through all of this craziness, I think do so much for me emotionally and as a mother, that I have to make myself just step back and be like, what kind of fun do we need right now? Like they don't need me to yell at them again. Like, what do they need?
Absolutely.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, I think for me, a lot of the feelings that have been similar. So my ex-husband deployed 5 days before my oldest was born. And that's when like the primary of my postpartum was bad. And so in a way, I feel like I'm kind of doing the exact same thing, except I'm not getting phone calls when I'm breastfeeding at 2 a.m. and I'm also not breastfeeding anymore. And so the biggest thing that I've noticed are that my emotions towards parenting have been super similar. So, one of the parts of like my story and my mental health journey as part of my postpartum psychosis pushed homicidal thoughts in my brain because I was so anxious about something happening to my oldest all the time that my brain went, hey, listen, if you just take action yourself, then you don't have to stress anymore. And that's what put me in the hospital. I need you to just hold on 1 minute. Can you just hold on 1 minute? Okay. And so what? Hold on 1 minute. And so there's just a lot of like emotions because when I was younger, when I was in my postpartum depression, I had so much resentment towards my ex-husband for being gone. And I had resentment towards my youngest because I didn't want to feel what I was feeling. And I had frustration that, this was a lot to take on by myself. And I noticed a lot of those similarities in COVID. I feel resentful towards my ex-husband that he is in a healthy, loving relationship with his girlfriend and that they have two people to help take care of themselves. And that has nothing to do with him. It has everything to do with me. And then sometimes I resent that I can't do a simple Zoom call without 1,000,010 things going on. And also I'm convinced my children are like just a different breed. Like, I'm just convinced. Nobody can change my mind. And so a lot of it has just been having to like sit back and try and Case, can you please just like chill for like 2 seconds? Trying to figure out where those feelings stem from, figuring out like, okay, well, why am I feeling that way? And it all really goes back to what Sherry was talking about of like feeling like I can't be good enough. Like the days that I feel successful in my job, I feel like I didn't do. Case, please stop, bud. I feel like I didn't do enough as a parent. Or the days that I feel like I focus completely on parenting, my anxiety strikes of what if I'm going to get fired because I didn't do enough and I can't balance both at the same time. Or the days that I feel super successful, I'm waiting for the shoe to drop. Like, okay, the depression's going to hit tomorrow because I was way too successful today. And I'm going to let Jasmine go because they're watching Smurfs and apparently want to join the band. So
I just want to thank you guys both for sharing those.
I think you're muted.
No, I can hear you.
Okay. I just wanted to thank you guys both for sharing those pieces of your story. I just want anyone who's listening to know that if you have felt at any time during COVID that it's like your days of early parenthood and not in the best way, you're not alone in those feelings at all. I do want to switch gears just a little bit before we wrap up. And I want to talk a little bit about how you handle conversations with your kids, especially your older kids, related to systemic racism, social justice, equality, the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others. Are those conversations that you are having in your home? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And how have you handled sort of the concept of prejudice and of stigma and trying to prevent those things in your home?
So for us, my 6-year-old doesn't have any clue about any of it. If it's not Fortnite related right now, he doesn't pay attention to anything. But my 8-year-old, he does. If I'm watching the news or something, he will watch it with me. And there are a lot of questions. And we're as honest as we can be with him. He's very, very intelligent. So he does get a lot of it, as much as an 8-year-old can. Explaining some of it is hard though, because sometimes we're trying to explain it, but it's kind of like, well, which way do we go here? Because he's like, well, are all police bad? So we have to explain, no, not all police are bad. There are some, kind of how there's some bad people, and just kind of breaking it up like that. But he does have a lot of questions. And then sometimes he will say things and he's 8, he doesn't realize if it's right or wrong. So he'll ask us, oh, is that something bad? Like, should I not say something like that? So I do like that he is asking the questions, and he does want to learn and does want to know what is right and what is wrong. But there's a lot of questions. We're just honest with him. I mean, as honest as we can be, because it's life. He's going to face it as he gets older. We'd rather him know now instead of hiding it all and making the world seem all fantastic. So.
And have you guys, as parents, been sort of on the same page on how to approach this, or was that a challenge to arrive at like your approach with this with your 8-year-old?
It was pretty much like what he saw on TV is kind of how it all started.
Yeah.
So that's where we just kind of went with it. He saw it on TV and started asking questions, and that's what started it all for us.
I definitely understand that. Sherry, what about your oldest? Have you guys been having conversations?
Yeah, she's kind of like Jasmine's oldest. Is he going to be 9? Is he in 3rd grade now?
Yes, he is in 3rd grade.
Okay, so yeah, they're the same age. Cora will be 9 next month on Halloween, actually. Coolest birthday ever. And she's been asking questions about why people look different since she was old enough to speak. Mom, why do all the other little girls in my gymnastics class have browner skin than me? And, so we had a conversation about how everybody's made differently, but that wasn't good enough for her. So I legit had a conversation with her about melanin and how it, like I didn't know what else to say. And there's another layer to this conversation in our household, obviously, because of my husband's job. We do live in Chicago, so we have a lot of that. My husband is a suburban police detective, so he does not work in the city, but very close to it. And it's the same thing. My kids grew up knowing that their daddy was a soldier, and they're growing up knowing that he's a police officer and he's a good man. So this really challenges their belief because there's so much, and it's really hard to shield them from it, especially my older one. So we do a lot of talking about racism. She knows what it means. She knows that historically in this country, people have been treated differently based on the color of their skin, and it's not okay. She knows that Black Lives Matter. She knows that there are good and bad people in every profession. And I purposely have introduced her to a lot of kids' books that have people of color as main characters, that talk about people of color and their accomplishments historically, especially women. It's really important to me that she know that things exist outside of our little bubble on the south side of Chicago.
Yeah.
Because we do live in a very middle-class white neighborhood in the city. So I have to go out of my way to teach her these things. She doesn't see that all the time. And I hope I'm doing a good job. I'm doing my best. And the same question you asked, Jasmine, my husband just defaults to me. I'm the primary parent on stuff like that. But
Because which is also a significant mental load that adds to the already present mental load of motherhood.
Yeah.
And I think you're not alone in that at all. I think a lot of people would agree that they are the decision maker when it comes to what and how they're introducing to their kids challenging topics, whether it's, purchasing a library that has diversity in it or watching the news and trying to answer questions and explain it. I think that challenge to the mental load of motherhood has really amplified this year too.
Yeah. And I mean, the only thing we really do shelter them from in terms of what's going on right now is all the really graphic violence. Like, they know that people are protesting and they know that sometimes it gets violent, but they're not seeing that. Like, I'll turn the channel.
Yeah.
I think it's important that they're aware, but I also think it's important that they're allowed to be kids, especially with my daughter and her anxiety stuff. Like, she already worries about enough as such a small person. She doesn't need to be worrying about all this other stuff right now either. But yeah, I mean, they're very up on like who the presidential candidates are, and they'll ask questions. And my son asked me today, why do people think President Trump is a liar? I'm like, because he is. Sorry, I know we shouldn't get political, but so like they know who's who and that kind of thing. And some people might not agree with that approach, but it's worked well for us so far. So.
And I appreciate you sharing that. I think, oh, sorry, I don't know where my feedback is coming from. I think that parenting in this season, where everything is sort of accelerated and a little bit louder and a little bit more in your face, in terms of things like race and social justice and equality and politics and all of the choices, women's rights and Black rights and all of the things. And I just, I commend every parent who is thinking about this, because this is hard, and it's hard to determine. My daughter's 16 months old, and I'm thinking, what's in her bookshelf? What is she looking at? Is she looking at only white faces? Is she looking at only girl faces? Like, what is she seeing? Because I don't want her to ever know that there's a difference. But also, like, it is everyone else thinking that? Like, is every other parent doing that? And are mothers of color thinking that they need to find representation for their kid? I just always want to be mindful. I always want to be empathetic towards other mothers. I think that motherhood is a game in which we are quick to shame and condemn, and all we really want is to stand up and cheer for each other. And I'm very pro stand up and cheer for each other. And I just I want to close that piece with, you guys are all really fantastic individuals and really kick-ass mothers. And I hope that even if you don't feel like it today, you hear me say it when you are. That's the end of the questions that I have for tonight. But I just want to open the floor up for a minute. If there's anything that I didn't ask you or we didn't talk about in terms of motherhood in 2020, please feel free to bring it up.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on really fast the last Hey, bud, please don't. You're going to fall off the couch. The conversations about social justice and just controversial. What's the word I'm looking for? Controversial. Thank you. English is difficult. And one of the things that I really had to learn is I grew up in an extremely ethnic, cultural, religious, diverse area. And so as we came to the forefront of Black Lives Matter and all of the other conversations in civil unrest and even the pandemic have come to the forefront, it was hard for me because these were conversations I was already having. These were conversations I was already participating in. These were conversations I was already advocating for. And I think as moms, if you especially are in a group that's not affected and you're already having these conversations, that you shouldn't put the pressure on yourself to increase them or dramatize them outside of your normal. Like, definitely increase the education. But one of the things that we've talked about on like one of the Project Red teams was, you know, like, it was really hard for me at first. What'd I tell you? I told you it was going to happen. One of the conversations that were really hard for me was, as people were coming out and making social media posts about Black Lives Matter, these were conversations I was already having with family members. They were conversations I was having with people in my communities. You know, especially moving from Richmond, Virginia, which is extremely diverse, to Clemson, South Carolina, which is predominantly white and very notorious for racism and ignorance and prejudice. It was kind of hard, and I felt a lot of anxiety and pressure on myself as a mom that I wasn't doing enough, because, you know, people were being very outspoken and vocal and like very public about it. But I think it's important too to kind of like take the pressure off yourself, that as long as you're doing the work that you need to do, that you feel is being done and the message is getting across and you feel like they're understanding, then it's good to take like the pressure off. But as far as like the last thing about like, just to say about parenting in 2020 is like, I think it's important to realize that like you've said multiple times, like people, it resonates, or like people are going to understand if your kids come in and out. And I think that, I don't even know where I'm getting at this point. Like, I'm just talking in a circle. But if like you're sitting in your house and something's happening and you're like, this is not happening to anyone else, it probably is. Like it really probably is. You're just in this place of isolation. And one of the good things about 2020 is that conversations are becoming public and open that weren't typically conversations that were accepted in the past. And so speaking out about your struggles and speaking out about the fact that my kid has tapped 3 different toys on the table next to me strictly to get my attention instead of being patient to wait is normal. He's not the only kid. It just happens that it's in the forefront of what we're doing right now. And so I definitely think it's important to lean in on like-minded people. Project Red Team is literally saved my life in this time period. Coming from a military family, if you will, it's really hard to find people who understand, especially, you know, if you get married young or you do life young, or, you know, your significant other's military experience is a rough one. It's hard to grow up really fast, kind of like you said, Sherry, with your oldest. She's kind of grown up really fast. And so I think it's important to find the like-minded people and to kind of take that risk. Because, you know, if you're like, hey, this is what my circle looks like, this is what my day-to-day looks like, and I want to be your friend, or I want to talk to you, or I want to confide in you. If someone says no, it has nothing to do with you. It's a reflection of what their space looks like in that time. That's not to say that they can't come back in the future. But I think one of the biggest things that we should recognize is just that, like, we have to be patient with ourselves and realize that it's okay to be an individual who also wears all of these different hats, and that someday some hats are going to fit better than the others. But as long as, you know, when you're reflecting back on the day, if you feel like you did the best that you could, that's really all that matters.
That's a great analogy with the hats. I love it. And I just, yes, I'm sitting here nodding to everything that you just said. Absolutely.
I tend to be kind of negative sometimes, and I use humor to diffuse my negativity, but I will try to close out with something positive. I think the silver lining, well, there's a lot of little silver linings of this, right? Like more family time and all that. But I think in terms of women being the primary care providers and women carrying that mental load, I'm hoping that this whole situation has shown people that we carry too much. And maybe it will let employers know that parents need that flexibility to be able to work from home sometimes in traditional, no, you're always in the office kind of roles. Or that if you can't work from home, well, can you flex your hours? And it shows people who are parenting together that like maybe things can be split down the middle, not because, you know, I always go back to my husband and it always feels like a competition as to who's more tired. Did you guys ever hear that joke? I'm more tired, I do more, blah, blah, blah. Like, not because it has to be totally equal, but because you're carrying the load together. And some days it's going to feel like you're doing everything, and some days it's going to feel like they're doing everything. But I'm hoping, like I said, I'm going off on a tangent now, but that the silver lining is that people see how much we as women carry, especially women that are working outside or inside the home as it is right now.
Yeah.
How difficult it is to manage everything. Like today, I had no idea if my husband was working or not, and which house the baby was going to. Was he going to be with me, or was he going to be with my mom? And was I going to be e-learning alone, or was my husband going to be here? I had my days all screwed up. So even little stuff like that, I'm like, ugh, you know. So just knowing that we're going to have to carry all this, right? But maybe our daughters won't.
I love that.
I'll just kind of close with, like all of you ladies have said, not every day is going to go great. We need to give ourselves that little bit of time and not realize everything is such a big deal. For example, when my kids started the e-learning, my oldest Camden was upside down on the couch with his laptop. And I was like, you can't do that. Like, you have to sit. You can't do that. And while he was upside down, he was still engaged. He was learning. His teacher's like, nope, he's fine. I can tell he's learning. He's engaged. So I was like, that's me stressing over something I don't need to stress over. So maybe some of these little things that we do stress over, if we just kind of step back a little bit and relax just a little bit, it might take a little bit of it off. I mean, we still do have a lot going on, but any little bit that we can kind of just not worry about, since we have so many other things to worry about, might just make the days a little bit easier.
Yes, absolutely. Agreed and love it and agreed. Thank you guys all so much, Sherry and Jasmine and Kennedy. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for sharing your stories with us. I want to also thank our listeners. We're really grateful that you hung out with us tonight. We hope that we shared sort of the best and the worst of parenting for us in 2020 so far, and we're grateful that you were part of the conversation. Just a little plug here, if you are interested and available to join us on October 8th from 9 to 2:30, we're having the Conversation Summit 2020, which is free with RSVP, and you can go to www.conversationsummit.com for information and to register. Conversations Cafe could not be brought to you without the amazing production team of Carl Evans, Mike Vinopal, my husband Rick Osowski, Vicki Cisnetti, Angel Overton, and Maisie Duncan. And on behalf of Hope for the Day, we'd like to thank you for joining us, and you can catch us here every week at conversationscafe.org. Thank you so much again for joining us. We're going to take you out with a short PSA about the stigma swear jar and how you can get involved, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Catch my kids in that video.
Yes.